So my name is Dane Laughlin. I'm leading the enterprise chair for today, and I'm going to invite Robert Hofmeister to the stage. He's the CEO of Goodly Innovations, and he'll be talking about AR in pharmaceuticals, in biopharma.
All right, time has started. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Robert Hofmeister. I'm the CEO of Goodly Innovations, a company looking at process guidance in AR for pharma and biopharma. We're solely looking at those segments. So we're kind of a niche company in what we're doing. Excuse me if I'm blanking out for a second once in a while. It's for me 2 o'clock in the morning. I just arrived from Munich. So I still have to fight the jet lag and caffeine level a little bit and see if it leveled out correct. Goodly Innovations. Why is this company and how did we get this company started? I think this is kind of an important point. Myself, having a background in media, technology, having actually lived here in the Bay Area for a good decade, started the company together with Dirk Schrader, who has been working in pharma, biopharma technology for over 20 years. He used to be was actually Bristol Myers Squibb, where we heard the talk earlier today. He also was global head of lean operation excellence of AstraZeneca. And I always say, he came with the suffering, with the problems that arise in shop floor operations in pharma. And we kind of said, we have a thing, because I had a company running AR, VR more in a marketing area before, that we actually have a real topic here we can address, and this is how we started Goodly Innovations about 5 years ago. By now we have implemented the system, and I'm going to talk about what it is in a bit, with quite a few companies. 6 of the global top 20 pharma companies are included. And we're seeing this kind of as a shop floor operations next level lean. That's what Dirk, with his lean background, always likes to call it. How to really make sure to optimize manual processes on the shop floor. That's what we are actually talking about. All right. The gentleman from Bristol Myers Squibb said earlier that sometimes management mixes up a lot of topics: AR, VR, smart glasses, smart devices. And actually, this is quite an interesting point, that often a lot of applications for technology get thrown into one bucket and then compared, and this often leads to bigger discussions, especially working with bigger corporations and pharma corporations. One person talks about one topic, the next person talks about the other topic, and this is something that is important for us to really differentiate. What are we talking about? And what we are talking about is process guidance, so manual processes on the shop floor in pharma. We started in packaging. I'm going to have a couple of examples later, and then moved, let's say, forward in the value chain with filling, clean room environments, now moving into smaller cases, smaller in terms of the scope or the size of, let's say, the machinery, into biopharma cases with cases like single-use equipment. But one thing they all have in common: processes in pharma are usually pretty complex. We have implemented cases with hundreds, 300, 400, 500 steps that are executed by teams, not by single person. This is really an important factor for us, the collaboration, that you don't have a process that is executed by a single person. It's actually can be really complex. You can have a team of 2 in this shift, the next shift you might have 3, then you might have a shift with 2 really experienced users, and then you might have a shift with an experienced and a lesser experienced person collaborating, and all that in a regulated environment where you have to really make sure your processes are done correctly. And that's what I'm gonna pick. I'm gonna show you in a minute a use case, how we believe, the topic was how to implement and scale the right way. Of course, this is our point of view from dozens of projects that we have run with pharma companies in the past, and some of them ran really nice and smoothly, others not at all, because I think often it really depends on what you're focusing on, what you're trying to achieve as little step after a step. So the productivity changes you see in pharma are often, like I mentioned, manual processes can be very, very complex. Hundreds of steps, you have portfolios of hundreds of SKUs running on one, let's say, packaging line, and the task going from one to the next, or vice versa, might be a different workflow. Keeping all that in your mind is just simply impossible. So people work often paper-based, as you can see in this image. This is actually taken during the format change on a packaging line. This is typical workflow that you see people with paper or running back and forth to an HMI, or in the best case with a tablet carrying in their hand, looking for what the next step is. And in pharma, believe it or not, the OEE, overall equipment effectiveness, actually the productivity of your equipment in the packaging line, can be as low as 30% out of available time that you're running, that you're actually really producing. And this can be an absolute driver in the industry to actually get that efficiency up. I think looking at the time, I have to jump a little bit forward. So what we see as a solution is our product called OptiWorks. It's a process guidance system on one hand, so we are digitizing processes, allowing, let's say, very complex processes with decisions to be digitized. So the work going towards the employee is digital, is not on paper anymore. Then it's guided, what we call dynamic multi-user with mixed devices. So the process can be executed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't really matter. People at the same time, the logic keeps place, tracks all that. And mixed devices means you can collaborate with, let's say, an AR device for a beginning user who gets perfect process guidance to where he has to execute his work, next to a senior person who just gets a light smart glass to get the information, but he doesn't need the spatial guidance. So in reality, this looks something like this. You would see in a minute in the video, there are 4 blue holograms hovering. This is seen through a HoloLens above the machines. So people could collaborate. In this case, 4 people can go in there and work together collaboratively on a process. This is 2 people working together here with AR guidance. They're being guided. You'll see that in a second with little arrows actually pointing them towards the next task, making sure they know exactly where to go, what to do, confirm the task, and after they execute it, they're being guided to the next step. It looks pretty trivial, but it solves really quite a lot of problems in terms of getting rid of the paper documentation, so really getting very efficiently your work done. And also at the back end, we can create an audit trail or save this data directly into external system like a pharma MES, manufacturing execution system, where all this data can be tracked for electronic batch records. So be it simple process guidance step by step or augmented with, let's say, images or additional SOP data for single execution. And what you'll see in a minute is also probably unique to regulated industries, tasks that have to be executed by 2 people. Line clearance is one of those tasks where one person has to execute a task and the other person then later has to come and confirm that the task has been executed directly. And we can do all this, including providing the digital signatures, setting all this into records, which is really important. Here you see there are 2 check marks in the top left corner, one for the first person to execute it, and after that is done, the next person can access the task. So it's not accessible before. It's really regulated that only one person can do a task at a time. It's blocked for the other person, and only after it's executed it's set free for the next person. But I'm going to talk in a minute about actually what we see as, after giving you a couple of examples on where we implemented this, what we see as a good approach to start implementing and start scaling, let's say, transformative technology like this. You could have a shift change, for example, in the middle of the process. Right now, people log out, other people authenticate, log in, and the system can track all this with all the required regulatory documentation. It's quite an effort to implement in the pharma industry because of all the regulatory requirements, and this is something that is really not to be underestimated. Let me just, in terms of the time, move to a couple of examples. On the left, we see an example from a case study. Viva Pharma, a smaller Swiss pharma company, was our first customer. They implemented the system during a testing phase in 2017 and has been running the system since 2018. And they have seen a 45% acceleration in execution of their manual processes. So the downtime of the machinery has been significantly reduced. They even were able to insource a lot of the work that has prior been outsourced to Asia and done in Asia back to Switzerland, and now they're actually executing those small batches that were too small to actually do prior in Switzerland, all in actually a pretty high wage country. They have scaled by now over all of their factories in Europe, all the way to Portugal, over multiple cases, from vial ampoules filling packaging to bottle filling lines, blister lines, and a couple of other cases I just forgot. The next case, moving on, is a German multinational pharma corporation who challenged us with implementing the system in a clean room environment. So this was quite significant because we had to get HoloLenses modified, or actually they did it to get them approved and qualified to be used in an A and C environment. So when was a respiratory filler, when that was open for the changeover, they used process guidance, AR process guidance, and their motivator was, it's actually a monoline, meaning there's only one product, so it's not a big portfolio where they have to change a lot. They said for them the driver was the quality department, who said we really need to make sure that we can get our processes done safely, securely, the peace of mind for the operators, not having a lot of stress. Sorry, I'm looking at my clock ticker here. I really have to move forward and skip over the others. I'm happy to talk later or in the other days. So what we've learned so far, I think the first slide, this should actually say, it is a change management project. When you implement something like this, any kind of newer technology that is really pushing the boundaries, I think, put a lot of effort in change management, not just in selecting technology, but actually working with your team and putting, and what customers said they would say it's between 50 and 70% of all the power and effort into change management, because it really is not just a top-down approach. We've seen that where management decided this line has really bad performance, it's really horrible, we need to implement it now, and it was a top-down approach, and it was a disaster because they didn't really look at the ground, at the reason for the problems of their bad efficiency and it was really, really tough to implement with the team and really convince them what they're doing. So starting with a small POC where you really find a good case, looking at the value chain, really, we like to sit with our customers if they don't really know what they're doing and evaluate along the value chain a case. And the example I'm going to show now was actually looking at line clearance cases in a viral vaccine factory where they have everything from API to packaging. And they said, okay, let's start at packaging. It's easier to access. We don't have to really worry about the clean room environment that much. And let's first look at a rather simple process, line clearance. It's a single process. It doesn't change that much. Standardizing the process, working with them. And the goal was basically a right first time approach along with removing basically paper on the way to the operators where they had to run around with paper instructions and away from the operator for the documentation. So this was a really, really smart decision because it is a rather simple process to implement, but with a high impact for them. And as I mentioned before, the AR system, I think I skipped that part before, sorry, can be used to really help people, newer people to onboard and learn towards this level of perfection to really reach that error-free execution of a process. But then when really working under stress, and that can happen, we're talking about often night shift, weekend pressure where you have to execute your work. The stress you can take away from your operator by guiding them with an AR system, because if you ask them in the daytime, they might know exactly what to do. But if they're really working on the process at night, helping them to get closer to perfection is really, really important. So once a process is implemented, and we're seeing this as a standalone usually. First, really don't overthink it. Don't scale immediately. Don't talk to global IT about how this could be scaled, because then you're going to talk in 3 years and you're not going to get anything done, from my experience. And then when you want to connect, think about what you want to connect. There will be a lot of voices. Oh, we need everything for analytics. Oh, we need it in the MES system. We need IoT connectivity to the line because then we can read this data and we can get all that information. Think about what you really need in a first step and don't plan everything at once because then you're never going to get started. We believe that, for example, connecting to an MES system is a really smart way because you can get rid of a lot of documentation effort. And if you look at documentation, that means, for example, on a packaging line or so, you could easily have tens of thousands of pages of paper a year in documentation for your records that you need to store. If you get rid of this, put it all in the digital system, this can really be an extremely great effort and result. What's really important is think about your documentation when you implement this, working with a vendor, really knowing what the requirements in pharma are is, I think, really, really key. Because if you're starting small and planning to scale later, we really have to know that the vendors are up to the challenge to really working with pharma and knowing the way around all the regulatory problems for implementing and scaling systems. Well then, this is what we often really see, picking one smart process, maybe trying to replicate that, maybe within one shop floor, maybe within one factory, and then going out, then just starting to think. Now we heard that mobile device mentioned earlier from Bristol Myers Squibb. It was really good because they said we started with small processes on a shop floor, and then once they've done it, they had to go think about mobile device management, how to handle. An apprentice is really doing a good job with that. Scaling hundreds and thousands of devices over connectivity over the internet, because in pharma you're not always going to connect immediately to the internet. When you're working, for example, on the shop floor on premise with MES systems connecting to the internet 3 years ago, pre-COVID, was unthinkable. I think the US was already better than let's say us in Europe. I'm a company, we are from Munich, but really think about when you move to a full cloud-based system, is a system flexible, can be deployed on-premise and later scale out. I think that's a really key factor. So the red light is blinking at me. The takeaway, like I mentioned before, put a lot of effort in change management. Look at the small process. Don't overthink it. Look at what really helps the user, the worker, your shop floor worker, reduce the stress, help them do their job better. Don't do a top-down approach where you just implement something. We had customers who actually bought HoloLenses and devices and put them in the training room and said, hey, go and play with it. And people got really curious. And then once they saw it in the shop floor, it's like, oh, now it's here, let's try, what is it? Rather than coming and saying, now we're talking your knowledge, you're the expert, and we're putting it all in the system, and afterwards your position as the owner of that knowledge is gone. And that's true. We had that earlier as well in the Bristol Myers Squibb talk. A lot of knowledge is going to be lost in the next decade from all the people retiring. So it's really crucial of getting that knowledge in a good way into a digital system. I guess since there's so much blinking at the moment, I'm gonna finish this here, and do we still have time for questions?
Yeah, we have time for questions. So does anybody have a question to start Robert off?
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. Does this use QR codes for localization of the headset?
No, what we're doing is completely proprietary. We don't use QR codes, we don't use CG models, we don't need any CAD data. This would be unscalable. You cannot scale when you have, let's say, a packaging line with 8 machines coming from 3-4 different vendors and then looking at the history of old machines. This is impossible. And we also don't want to put stickers in some environments. You cannot put stickers. So we're working with proprietary, based on, in this case, with HoloLens. Based on HoloLens technology, we put basically a level on top. And we've done so far shop floors up to 750 square meters, which is like 8,000 square feet. Didn't run into any issues on size yet.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Have you experienced any tolerancing issues, like how far away that possibly your AR models are from where they possibly should be within your shop floor?
Well, this is something that I think what I just mentioned was what we are trying to do with our system, trying to solve this. I would say the tolerance that we see is 1 or 2 centimeters. Precision. When you're further away, they might be 20, 30 centimeters away, but as you come closer, we're basically optimizing and they get more steady and then fall into place where they should be. We actually have customers who ask for additional holograms at landmarks. So let's say the tip of this microphone, so they can always confirm, is this hologram still where it should be? It's always visible, basically, and then they know that everything in the surrounding is also still where it should be, because sometimes you have a machine, you have switches next to each other, so we really need to make sure that you're really precise.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thanks.
I was curious, often workers are assigned their job through a system, so they do the right procedure on the right machine. Did you guys tackle that challenge?
I'm not quite sure if I understand. So usually, you have to be trained on equipment to execute it. So you have at least a base training on some kind of equipment.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that capturing and scaling the right way to do the job, but a specific worker on a shift is usually, they don't just walk out and just start doing stuff, right? They're given Sometimes it's through an SAP system, sometimes it's through an MES system, so that they go to the right machine and run the right procedure. That's kind of what I'm asking.
So, I mean, the procedure, it really depends. We're usually looking at, for example, mostly not at the operation, like the in-between steps, the changeovers, the line clearance when there's downtime. So if we're connecting, for example, for an MES system, the MES system can trigger our system to start the right procedure by procedure ID, or saying we're coming from SKU 1 going to SKU 25, and we can actually calculate the difference and see if one machine has the identical setting and therefore does not have to be changed. You can completely skip that work, or really defining the procedure that has to be done, or it's the shift supervisor who selects the procedure and starts it. So it works that the process gets started. And then people log in, we call it join. So it's actually, the procedure is running once it has been started either manually or by an external system like an MES, and nobody is executing. So people log in and join, authenticate against the system, then we know who is working with what device. And then, like you've seen the picture with the different holograms, you can actually choose, oh, I want to go to the case packer. Or, excuse me, can you please go to the other line? I really don't want to work on this part. I would rather work on that part. So it leaves a certain amount of freedom for people to hover around the machines. But once you're in a process, it follows strictly the process guidance of how the process has been laid out and approved and is actually released as a process.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Robert. We really appreciate it. Can we get a round of applause for Robert, please?